This is a video I honestly wasn't sure I was ever going to make, especially this soon after my accident. A little over 2 weeks ago, I was in a motorcycle accident that changed my life forever. I ended up losing my left leg above the knee, as you can see. Since then, I've spent a lot of time just trying to come to terms with what happened, replaying that day in my head, and just trying to figure out how I move forward from here. I've always been a pretty private person, especially when it comes to my emotions, but I've realized that real healing doesn't begin until you can be open, honest, and vulnerable with yourself and the people who care about you. So today, I want to share exactly what happened on that day, not for pity, but because I truly believe that sharing this might help somebody else who's going through something unthinkable right now. And just a heads up, especially if you're somebody that's close to me, somebody that knows me personally, and hearing details about injury and trauma make you uneasy, I completely understand. I lived through a nightmare, and I'm gonna share those details. So if hearing those details in full make you uneasy, it's totally okay to click away. But if you are still here, here's my story. I was a relatively new rider. I had just got my first bike about 6 or 7 months ago. It was a Suzuki SV650, and I fell in love with riding instantly. It's something I'd always wanted to do since I was a kid. I loved sitting on bikes, I like looking at bikes. But as an adult, I never could because of my career as a professional soccer player. So once my wife and I moved down to Charlotte 6 or 7 months ago, I figured what better time than now to get my first bike. So Memorial Day weekend rolled around. I wanted to do something special. I'd never been out to the mountains in Western North Carolina before, so I figured what better opportunity than now to go explore the twisty mountain roads, just me, my bike, and the open road. But the thing is, I was unfamiliar with the area. I didn't know the turns, I didn't know the grades, I didn't know the elevation changes, but it turns out that's all part of the adventure. I rode my way to the top of the mountain, had just started my descent, and that's when it happened. There was a long downhill section heading into a left-hand turn. I couldn't see the exit point of the turn. I didn't know how sharp it was, so I didn't know if I was gonna make the turn or not. I panicked a little bit heading into the turn and got on the brakes hard. The rear wheel locked up and the back of the bike started to slide out, so I got off the rear brake, but at that point, the rear tire caught traction and it snapped the bike back up and ended up throwing me off the bike into a guardrail. This was the one thing that always made me nervous about my bike. It didn't have ABS, so there were no safety nets, no forgiveness if you panicked, no second chances. The moment I hit the guardrail, I knew something was wrong with my leg. When I moved it, it felt light. My first thought was, no, this cannot be happening to me right now. This didn't just happen. But then survival mode kicked in. I crawled a few feet back onto the road, looked at the turn, flagged down the first car I could see. I made eye contact with the man who ended up pulling over, and I will never be able to thank him properly. He was calm, composed, and luckily made all the right decisions, or else I might not be here today. He came over to me. He could clearly see the damage. He asked me what hurt. I said my left arm, my left leg. I knew my arm was okay. I wasn't too worried about it, but I also knew my leg was a mess. He either called 911 himself or had somebody else who stopped do it. But then he started looking through my backpack. I'm not even sure what he found, but he said to me, "This is gonna hurt." And then he tied a tourniquet around my leg to stop the bleeding. Fortunately or unfortunately, throughout this entire situation, I was completely conscious. I was as sharp as I could possibly be. I was able to rattle off phone numbers, my name, where I'm from. So I remember everything. And then he asked if I wanted him to call anybody. I gave him my wife Erin's phone number. He tried calling her a few times. She's not normally one to answer random calls, and I told him that because he asked me. So he shot her a text. He said, "Stefan crashed, call now." And he ended up getting her on the phone. He told her the situation, excluding some details, just to make sure she didn't panic. And then he brought the phone over to me, put it on speaker, held it up to my helmet, and I got the chance to talk to her. I told her I was in a little accident, my leg is injured, and I'm gonna be taking a quick trip to the hospital. I don't even remember what she said after that, if I'm being honest. I mustered up all the strength and focus I could just to keep my voice as calm as possible, to try to keep her as calm as possible. While we were waiting for the ambulance, I moved around the rest of my body. Left arm, awesome. Right arm, still good. Right leg, can still move it. I wasn't paralyzed. I always knew the risk I was taking getting on a bike, but I also took the proper precautions as well, which probably ended up saving my life. I never got on a bike without a helmet, without motorcycle-specific jacket, jeans, boots, gloves, and an airbag vest, which went off in the accident. Probably saved me from a whole lot worse injury. And that's when the man came over to me and said, "You still have your life, and that's all that matters." He talked to me the rest of the time until the ambulance came, asked me my name, where I was from, what I was doing out there riding, kept me calm, and he said the most important thing now is just to not go into shock. During this whole time, I never once looked down at my leg. I refused to. I was 95% sure that it was gone, but I didn't want to see the confirmation of that. And then I made the mistake of looking out in front of me, just assessing the situation. And that's when I saw it, about 10 to 15 feet away from me, a single motorcycle boot with a couple inches of bone sticking out of the top of it. And that image will be burned into my mind forever. Eventually, the ambulance came, they loaded me in, and they drove me 8 miles down to the bottom of the mountain where a helicopter was waiting for me. I remember the EMTs talking in that ride down. They said something like, "We should probably do more for his leg." The other one said, "I see what you're seeing, but it's not really bleeding that much." They also said multiple times that the limb is in a cooler on ice. I guess they were trying to save it. I knew I wasn't getting that leg back though. I kept my eyes closed for most of that ride, but I do remember them talking. I remember them saying, I was given fentanyl, probably for the pain, and I was given 3 units of blood. I don't know if that was on the ambulance or in the helicopter. I do remember being freezing cold on the helicopter though, whether it was from the altitude or the blood loss, I don't know. I do remember them giving me something. If I had to guess, it was probably blood, and I remember feeling much better, much warmer after that. When we finally landed, I was rushed into the ER. I was immediately surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses. I gave them all the information I had, my name, date of birth, where I was from, emergency contact. I was sharp. I was as with it as you can possibly be in a situation like that. And even when they were taking my blood pressure, they asked me if I had any previous medical history, medical issues. I remember telling them like my blood pressure is usually a little high the first couple times. I think I get nervous at the doctor's office, which I guess is pretty funny looking back on that now. And then they rolled me onto my side to do some tests. They asked me to squeeze my glutes. They were pressing on each of my vertebrae, going all the way down my spine, checking for injuries. And I felt no pain with any of that. And then they told me they had to take some scans, x-rays, CAT scan, check for any internal damage. And they told me to relax my leg, which I thought was odd. Little did I know, I was probably holding my leg up at a 45-degree angle this entire time. It was incredibly uncomfortable to move and felt impossibly light, and I didn't even realize it wasn't resting on the bed probably the entire time. They took all the scans, and miraculously, I don't even know how, I had 0 other injuries. 0 head trauma, no neck injuries, no spinal injuries, no internal damage, no internal bleeding, not even a bruise in my body. The only visible mark I had on my body was a little scratch, which you probably can't even see, from landing on the pavement and my jacket riding up a little bit and scratching the dirt or pavement. Other than that, I was perfectly fine, minus the leg, obviously. And that's when they told me they needed to take more of my leg. They said it would be an above-knee amputation. I assume because of the debris from the guardrail, the road, obviously it wasn't a clean cut when this happened. They needed to take it from a fresh area, so they took the rest of my leg from a couple inches above the knee. I said, okay, do what you gotta do. I was a little bit nervous at first when they told me they were gonna take me from above the knee. I know how important a biological knee is to walking, but I got over that pretty quickly. I was just grateful to be alive, to be stable, and to be taken care of. So they took me back. I went into surgery, which lasted about an hour and a half, I think. And when I woke up, I asked the nurse how everything went. She said, great, no complications. And then they wheeled my bed to my hospital room where my wife, Erin, was there waiting for me. I remember My first words to her were, "I'm sorry." First thing she said back was, "Don't be." But I couldn't help feel guilty just for the situation I put her in, or a situation that could have been much worse, which I learned over these past 2 weeks is my biggest fear. But amazingly, and if you've seen my first video, you could probably tell the positive spirit I was in. I was in that spirit almost right from the start. Right after I told her I was sorry, I wanted to keep things light. Jokingly, I told her, I should have gone mountain biking today instead. And that's the other option I was debating on doing earlier that morning. But that's really it. We ended up staying in the hospital for 7 nights. I had another surgery 3 days later. And that's my story. That's how I lost my leg. But I didn't lose my life, and I sure as hell didn't lose my purpose. Recovery is gonna be a journey. Physically, mentally, emotionally, I'm still very early on in this process, but I'm also still here, and I'm not done. If you're going through something right now, anything, just let this be a reminder that you are much stronger than you think you are. And this is just the beginning.